Hey there, Internet friends. Welcome to another episode of That Nerdy Site Show, a weekly podcast where the team members from That Nerdy Site get together to talk about our lives and all of the nerdy things we love about them. Joining me this week, we have Logan Wilkinson. How you doing, Logan?
I'm doing fantastic. Happy Mother's Day to all the mothers out there.
Happy Mother's Day. Yes, we are recording this on Sunday, so if you're listening to this the day it goes live, happy belated Mother's Day to you or yours. Before we dive into this episode, a little bit of housekeeping. If you like what you hear, please remember to like, subscribe, rate, review the podcast everywhere you can. If you're feeling extra generous, you can always support us over on Patreon at patreon.com/thatnerdysite. No new patrons to shout out and celebrate this week, but if you do support us over there, we give you kind of a welcome shout out here at the top of every episode of this show. This episode is going to be a little different because this is something that Logan reminded me. He and I actually talked about doing something like this years ago, and so this is kind of a backdoor pilot of an idea we had called the Bard's Cast, or was it the Bardcast or Bard's Cast?
I don't know. I like Bard's Cast, I think.
Bard's Cast. So the idea was basically like for those that don't know, prior to me doing anything in like video games and kind of like pop culture stuff, I was in theater for many years, and studied it. That's what I went to school for. And Logan also has a fun affinity for theater, and so we talked about kind of doing like a podcast around Shakespeare or just theater in general, like going and seeing plays or reading a play or something, and then kind of discussing it and its place in culture and all that kind of stuff. And one of the things that this whole quarantine state has made available is a lot of theaters, to try and kind of keep themselves relevant, are putting content out there on the web, like plays or musicals are out there, and it's basically like the filmed for archive purposes version of the shows. And this kind of first came up a few weeks ago when Logan, you reached out to me about Phantom of the Opera, right? You'd seen like a version of that had been kind of put online, and you guys were watching that. And then we've kind of gone back and forth on some other shows that have been made available. One of the ones that made the rounds here a lot in this last week that I saw was Johnny Lee Miller and Benedict Cumberbatch playing Frankenstein. I've seen a lot of sites kind of like checking that out, which is something I saw years ago in a production. Or I saw those versions of that show years ago as kind of a special feature that the Phoenix Art Museum here in town was doing. Similar to kind of the topic of today's show is Much Ado About Nothing, which is specifically the David Tennant, Catherine Tate version that was recorded back in 2011 originally. I had kind of floated that out to you as like, hey, here's another one that's out there that you might want to check out. And you kind of immediately jumped on that because you are a huge fan of the film version of Much Ado with Kenneth Branagh and Emma Thompson from the early 90s or something like that.
93, probably, if I had to guess. 94, yeah.
Yeah, so somewhere back in that day. So you kind of like were like, yeah, let's hop in, let's watch this and let's talk about it. So I'll include kind of a link in the description for those that are interested in this kind of thing to hop in and discuss. But this is kind of the nerdy topic of this week. We're going to be talking about Much Ado About Nothing. This production in particular, and then kind of comparing it to others that we've seen, like the film version or other film versions that we've seen, maybe even our history with the show itself. So so I'll throw it to you kind of first to kind of kick off. What is your relationship with Much Ado About Nothing? Do you remember like when you first would have seen that film version of the show, and any other potential versions you've seen of it?
Yeah, I would say for me, the first time I would have saw it would have probably been in high school, if I had to guess, right? Like English class in high school, where we just consumed so much Shakespeare. Yeah,
I specifically, so I had seen it a couple times before. I had seen the show before that myself, but the first time I saw the film version, I distinctly remember was my humanities class in sophomore year of high school. And I specifically remember because we had to get permission slips signed because it starts in like a bath scene. And so there's like naked women like wandering around. So we had to get permission slips to see this film. And I remember that being the weirdest thing.
We didn't have to get permission slips. We're pretty chill about that, actually, and I think about it. But I remember seeing it then, but I don't have any concrete memory of like that. I just know that I did. And then it was probably like 3 years ago now. I like really watched again, like as an adult, just kind of consumed it, the Kenneth Branagh and Emma Thompson one, and just felt utterly in love, right? And like, 'cause this was a point in time where like 2-3 years ago, for like again like probably 15 months, I was just consuming like so many different film Shakespeare adaptations, like pretty much all of them I could get my hands on. Um, Building up to Kenneth Branagh's Hamlet, which I actually never got around to seeing. But this one in particular is one that stuck out and really just floored me, right? Like, I've said it numerous times since, and we're like, it's in the running for being my favorite romantic comedy. I think Branagh and Emma Thompson's chemistry is great, probably because they were married, for starters. But they just give such a great performance. And, like, this whole cast in that film is, like, low-key stacked of like future stars, or like stars that are already kind of there, right? Like with Denzel Washington, it's Kate Beckinsale's first ever film. Robert Sean Leonard from House is going to be in this thing too. Like Michael Keaton. I think it's just a film that it's Keanu Reeves too, I guess. Holy shit, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's that thing like the more you pull back, the more it's just I think everybody commits to it so good. And then for me, that kind of became my gold standard of Shakespeare film adaptations, and very easily could still be my top one. And comparing it to this film, I would say, or this kind of adaptations version of it, obviously, it's interesting the things I love more or less in each one. But like what remains the same is that like Much Ado About Nothing is such a great Shakespeare play, I think.
Mm-hmm. It's become such the like archetypical, like these two hate each other, but of course deep down we can see that they love each other, and it's like coming together. That storyline that is so the will they won't
so
they.
Ubiquitous, right?
Yeah.
And it's funny too because you brought up the point when we first were talking about this like a few years ago, where it's that thing of. It seems like such a cliche, but it's that thing of like this is like actually one of the things that like first made that like archetypal relationship a thing.
Yeah, we talked about that when we talked about Emma. Yeah, that idea that like the things we take for granted in storytelling because we've grown up with television as kind of a medium or film even. We see all these stories, and then you have to like when we go back and see like one of the earliest adaptations or the earliest versions of those kinds of stories, it's like, oh yeah, like before this there wasn't a kind of storyline, or before Emma there wasn't that whole clueless storyline kind of idea. So it was kind of the like the tropes that we just see because we get 20 new shows a season or something that explore these kinds of romantic comedy tensions. Like when you go back to the 1600s for Shakespeare's stuff, it is like this like a lot of his stuff is certainly also pulling from other stories of the time, but his are the ones that have lasted the test of time, and so like his are the easiest ones to point to for this is a Much Ado About Nothing type of story, or this is a Twelfth Night type of story, like Twelfth Night being the girl disguising herself as a guy, and then ends up falling in love or whatever. Like those things are so inherent in the Shakespeare kind of storylines, and so this one of the things that we had talked about was like in the original kind of pitch of the Bardcast would be like, okay, let's like identify a play, and then like let's talk about other versions of that play and how those things have been like adapted into like modern different stories. Either like here's an episode of TV that really kind of does this story well or badly or whatever the case may be, or here's a movie that isn't Much Ado and it's not using those characters but it's very much inspired or an adaptation of Much Ado About Nothing or something like that. So seeing I've seen at least 4 different versions of Much Ado myself. And like it's just still fun stuff. My personal history, I was thinking about this as knowing we were going to be talking about this on the show this week. The first time I ever saw Much Ado was actually in 8th grade. So in like my 8th grade English or humanities class, we again had to get permission slips signed because we went to see my high school do it because they like so the year ahead of me, or the so I was in 8th grade. My high school was in 9th through 12th grade, and when I was in 8th grade, they were doing Much Ado About Nothing at Saguaro at my high school. And so we went and basically got out of school for, half a day or something to go see the play there. And basically go see these kids who were, 1 to 4 years older than us doing the show, many of whom I would end up going on to be friend and stuff in my high school years, as I befriended like upperclassmen and stuff. And the thing at my high school was like every other year, like they basically alternated between like we're going to do a Shakespeare one year and then the next year's a musical and then a Shakespeare and then a musical. And while I was there, my 4 years, we actually only did one Shakespeare because the year that would have otherwise been Shakespeare, they were like renovating the theater, so it was basically closed for half the year or something when that slot would have been in. So yeah, I saw it. My 8th grade, I saw people that I ended up later becoming friends with do Much Ado About Nothing. And then my senior year, I ended up doing Midsummer, one of the other kind of iconic, romantic comedies of Shakespeare. But yeah, so I saw it live first in 8th grade, and then in 10th grade we saw the film version, and then I probably saw the Joss Whedon version before I saw this version for the first time, because I saw this one. You are just being introduced to this particular one with David Tennant and Catherine Tate this last week or so, but I saw it years ago, back when I was doing more theater stuff and back when I was like super into Doctor Who. But also famously, right after wrapping on Avengers, Joss Whedon basically to like decompress from that big crazy project in 2012 got a whole bunch of his friends together from like all the shows he had done, and some of the movies and stuff, and got together all those people for like a weekend of filming at his place, like his personal house, and he basically shot an indie version of Much Ado About Nothing, with a bunch of people like Ashley Johnson's in there, just from our kind of more nerdy sphere, but I want to say Amy Acker and Alexis Denisoff are kind of the Benedict and Beatrice, or Beatrice and Benedict, of that one. Clark Gregg's in there. Nathan Fillion, I think, is Dogberry in that one. So yeah, he had like a fun cast of kind of the Whedon regulars in that, as another version of it that people can certainly seek out. But this one, I remember seeing with a friend of mine, again, I think at the art museum, and we were both drawn to it because we had just been going through and watching all of Doctor Who up to that point, and obviously David Tennant and Catherine Tate were kind of a doctor and companion pairing on Doctor Who for a season in this in the reboot series that started, I don't know, 10, 13 years ago now. And so like as a fan of kind of them both, getting to see them in this version was a lot of fun. And so when I threw it out to you, you kind of like glanced at it and looked through a little bit of it and was like, yeah, let's watch this and let's talk about it. So I hopped off the call with you that night and basically like threw it on and rewatched it and was like, yep, I like, A, this is a great show, and B, there are some choices and ideas that they put in this particular version that I really enjoy. It's probably not, I wouldn't say, I would still, I probably, and I think you would agree, I think the Kenneth Branagh one is still like a definitive version of the show, especially because like the cast of that one is so kind of stellar, kind of through and through, whereas this one, I mean, like the performers are all great, but it's not anybody you would recognize or anything. Like nobody else in this cast really like is I recognize them from such and such a thing. It is British actors who do the British stage basically. And David Tennant and Catherine Tate were absolutely the headliners brought in to do that show. So yeah, what did you think about this version in particular?
It's funny because, so like you mentioned, you basically recommended it, and I literally went over to YouTube and played the first 3 minutes and was like, yeah, I'm in love with this. Like, it was that simple. Like, I think it's got a great immediate opening, right? Like David Tennant in the golf course just like blasting onto the stage.
Yeah, he comes driving in on a golf cart.
Yeah, it's such a great like visual image. I love their just like Catherine Tate's out like a British Jersey Shore-esque look in the opening. Is like all I can even describe that as. Like all of them in their uniforms. Like I think everything about it immediately just grabbed me and was like, yes, I love this kind of look and the style. I think the level of humor that they're leaning on here in the first 3 minutes. And then I think it just kind of carries through. Like there are obviously things I'm sure we'll get to that I don't like as much as kind of some of the other versions I've seen, and things I didn't love as much, whatever. But like I think from start to finish, David Tennant and Catherine Tate's presence and their chemistry is so good, right? Like they had the benefit, I think, of having done an entire season of Doctor Who together, right? Like they know each other, I think, cadence very well. They know each other's timing very well. Even before this, like David Tennant had guested on Catherine Tate's show. Like they are just people who are friends and who know kind of how the other performs, I think, and I think that kind of shines through. I think I'm almost tempted to say, like in the pantheon of a romantic comedy, that this one is definitely much more of a comedy. Like it is a very funny version, and like at times I think maybe a like more straightforward comedy than the Kenneth Branagh version, for instance. But it works so well. Like I think it's exactly what like I kind of envisioned with David Tennant and Catherine Tate performing together for a Shakespeare play.
Yeah, I think one of my minor hangups on this version is that I don't see David Tennant and Catherine Tate as having like romantic chemistry, kind of.
Oh
like you're
yeah,
talking, but like they are the best of chums, and I think
yes,
that clearly comes across in their banter and their back and
Yeah.
forth and all the fun that they're having in this version. But yeah, I don't see them as like romantic music, orchestral swelling, and all that kind of stuff. I don't see that happening. And admittedly, like even in the broader show, like that sentiment is much more reserved and for Hero and Claudio to have. But when you have, especially like when it is such a discrepancy maybe between like celebrity and kind of the rest of the cast, like those are the two people that you know, so obviously those are the two people that are going to be front and center, and they are often billed as like the leads of the show. So it does when you have kind of your front and center leads that don't really have like the romantic relationship to really fulfill that narrative thread. But yeah, I think they absolutely kind of nail the humor and the banter with one another. So let's talk about for those that aren't familiar or haven't watched it yet. It is kind of set in a modern-ish era. I would say probably it's set in like the 80s, especially because there is within the show there's a sequence where they're at basically a masked ball and everybody's kind of in masks, so you can have that kind of that trope of characters talking to one another without realizing they're talking to each other, and talking about, like in this instance you have Beatrice talking about Benedict and how arrogant and foolish and pompous he is to Benedict, and it's and the setting it as like an 80s costume party. You have you have Beatrice is basically like suave Michael Jackson, I want to say, like Smooth Criminal style Michael Jackson dressed up, and Benedict is dressed up as like Madonna meets Miss Piggy. You have like people in it's either the red jumpsuit from Richard Pryor's comedy special, or he is like the red jumpsuit from Eddie Murphy. So you have like just very iconic costume design in that all evokes the 80s. I want to say like you have a Princess Diana is in there. I want to say that's what Hero's dressed up as or something. So it's you have kind of all these fun little touchstones that help, instead of it just being like your standard masquerade where everybody's just got kind of like the cutout, mask over the eyes or something. You have them having fun with these characters that are also helping kind of tell the audience a little bit about these characters based off of the fact that like Benedict has no problem going out there in like fishnet stockings and just making a fool out of himself. That says something, as opposed to how he might be dressed in a different version of this show. So that's one sequence in particular that I like, and fits in with the 80s '80s luxury kind of modern setting and aesthetic. What did you think about that sequence and kind of the decision, I guess, in general of the setting of this version?
I was actually just reading. So yeah, it's set apparently in like 1980s Gibraltar, right after like the Falklands War. I think it's I think because I haven't seen the Joss Whedon one. I would assume it's set in modern times too.
It's if I recall correctly, it's been a while since I've seen it. I feel like that one was done as kind of a noir piece. Like I said, it's all in black and white, and so I think they kind of shoot it as like a 50s noir detective kind of thing.
Okay, well then even better. Yeah, like I think doing a modern adaptation of this, like, or modern-ish, I guess 80s, is like such an obviously brilliant idea, right? Like I love the Romeo and Juliet with Leonardo DiCaprio and Claire Danes set in the modern times, and I think this one with like the 80s setting, again with like the naval uniforms and everybody kind of just partying, it's such a great, I think, idea and setting in place to put Much Ado About Nothing, right? Where I think this is maybe one of Shakespeare's comedies in particular that I think translates really well to the modern age. I mean, like, inherently the main kind of premise of these two people who don't like each other then fall in love has been stolen and like been put into virtually every romantic comedy anyway, it feels like. So I think that works so well. But then the rest of the larger class, I think, to put it in kind of 80s, like post-Falklands War kind of British Empire, works really well in kind of maintaining the class distinction. I think it works in terms of maintaining these kind of levels of like society between the cast, and then also it just allows them to have really a ton of fun that, and like I think, open up to play to different ways to kind of have fun with this cast of characters and have fun with what they're kind of doing. That the Kenneth Branagh one obviously very much adheres to. This is set in like 1500s kind of era still, and this one is much more, I think, again, going back to the earlier point we each have made, I think has fun with where it's set. I think, again, it leans more into the comedy aspect of where it's set, and I think you can have so much fun as this being a comedy with it being 80s England. And I think it just further ties into the fact that this is not the most romantic version of Much Ado About Nothing. If you're coming for the most romantic interpretation of this play, I have bad news for you. But it is quite possibly the funniest version, and I think the 80s setting works really well with that.
Yeah, and that's even I want to say hero in that costume party, I think is like Material Girl Madonna. Like that's kind of the look she's going for. So it is. It's so filled with like 80s iconography that we could still recognize as I mean, it is the, you know, all of the iconic kind of figures of that age without, and it's far enough removed that like we can see them and we can like identify them as touchstones, and they are the people that have kind of carried on into this day and age in some form or another. And that adds like another point of like relatability to this, even if you have a hard time grasping the flowery language of Shakespeare. You can still enjoy the visuals enough to help tell the story and help carry you through the story as an audience person.
I will say to that point, I mean, we should just address the elephant in the room, I guess, right there, with like Shakespeare is hard to understand, and I think I can't remember where I first like read it or heard it, but like it remains super true and I think super relevant still, where it's like Shakespeare is meant to be performed and not read. Yeah. And I think watching people perform it, whether on film or on the stage or kind of any version of this, helps you understand the language, helps you grasp kind of what is going on, like through their actions and through the kind of their movements. You cannot not understand what is happening. And I think for me too, this is a play I think that is a bit easier to understand in terms of the overall language. Like, this is not Macbeth, which I think can be trickier at times. It's a bit more dense. Yeah. And this is one that is much more kind of flowery and kind of very almost flamboyant-esque at times. And I think Tate and Tennant's performance, as long as the whole cast, I think helps kind of ease the language barrier even more. And I will also say that, like, no offense, Trevor, me and Trevor Stark are not like the most brilliant men in the world here. Like, if we can understand Shakespeare, like, it is like you can do it. Like, don't let, I think, the fact that it is kind of Shakespearean, Elizabethan language distract you from the fact that this is a great, I think, performance and a great play in general, because it is. And like once you get in the door, I think you will be surprised how easily you pick up what is happening and how easily you kind of understand the language.
Yeah, all very good points. It absolutely is more meant to be performed than read in a book with like all sorts of footnotes that are filling you in on stuff that like even the groundlings didn't care about or didn't know about. It's just kind of like, oh yeah, there's interesting academic notes and stuff in there. The thing I would liken it to in this day and age now really is, and the reason I would say Shakespeare, the language barrier that people have with Shakespeare isn't even so much like the language so much as the denseness of how much is in these shows, especially compared to like most modern plays have maybe like a third of the words that Shakespeare has, because Shakespeare was written as poetry and it was written to kind of with a certain meter in mind. The closest analog I would make today would be something like Hamilton, where the first time you listen to Hamilton or you watch Hamilton, there's a lot there that you're going to miss, but you're still going to get the general idea of the show. Like the big bullet points you're going to understand, and there's just more for you to dig into upon repeat listens or repeat viewings of a show like that, because so much is being packed in there.
Yes.
But and so it's the same way we hear with Shakespeare and with Much Ado in particular. Like you can follow the story even if you're not following every word of the story.
Yes, 100%.
But then like in future like watches of it, you'll catch different things, or you'll see how, you know, certain lines might echo or mirror, you know, how you know the crew that are talking to Benedict might echo and mirror how the crew are talking to Beatrice, and try and like bringing them together and all that stuff. And a lot of that is like it's there, and it so much of it is there, and it's even like recognized at an unconscious level because of how well crafted the stories are. And it's much more like you'll dive into this when you actually study this stuff in college, or you're writing a paper on these things. That's when you really get to like those extra levels, but you don't need to get to those extra levels if you're just kind of enjoying for entertainment purposes. I mean, so seeing this version or seeing the Kenneth Branagh version, you can enjoy those and understand what's happening because of how they're filmed or how they're directed and how they're acted and performed, even if you don't follow every single word, or you don't catch every little reference that they're making to historical figures or random other characters and stuff like that.
It's the thing for me too of like, people get too caught up in trying to understand every word, and like if you miss words in a regular movie that is set in 28, like if you miss random words in Avengers Endgame, it will not be the end of the world. But I feel like people kind of get in their own heads. They have to like understand everything that's being hurled at them in this movie. And it's like, I mean, I think in terms of density of like wordplay, like Hamilton is a great comparison, I think. Sure, that's actually really, really apt. But I mean, like, in terms of TV, like, if you have watched Gilmore Girls, or if you've watched an Aaron Sorkin show, you can, like, it is a similar thing where it's like, a Gilmore Girls script is, like, 5 times the amount of, like, words, unless they're television script, and, like, same with an Aaron Sorkin thing, and, like, they're full of, like, verbal wordplay and just, like, dense, fast, rapid-paced language. And I think in a similar vein, like, that is how Shakespearean plays are written, especially, I would argue, the comedies. And so I think you have more faith in yourself. If you can watch Gilmore Girls, if you can watch Aaron Sorkin, if you can listen to Hamilton and understand what's happening, you will be surprised at how quickly you can watch this and keep up with it.
Yeah, the comedies in particular. So like with a lot of the tragedies or a lot of the history plays, you have these epic sword fights that are often portrayed in modern, you know, retellings or plays or whatever of them. And in the comedies themselves, you don't necessarily have that action, but you have the same sentiment of like a verbal sword fight between here, Benedict and Beatrice. Good. Anytime they spar and they're kind of one-upping each other in their lines, like you can, or I can visualize it again because I studied this and and like this is just how my mind works sometimes. I can see them basically having I guess the best parallel here would be like Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead, where they have a tennis match in that where they're like making points with one another, and they're basically like upping one another in the dialogue, and then also like visually kind of like showing what that like tete-a-tete looks like. And so in these kinds of things, I can almost visualize Benedict and Beatrice having kind of like a Princess Bride like sword fight, where it's, you know, you have Inigo Montoya and Wesley kind of there having their little banter while they're also having this sword fight back and forth, and you can just appreciate both when somebody gets in a good move and somebody else is kind of like on the back foot. Just here, it's without the swords in hand. It is, but it's still the exact same sentiment. It's everybody's. One of the best directors I ever had was talked about how basically in every scene you're in, you're either winning or losing. You go into any scene, you want something out of that scene, and if you end that scene and you got what you wanted, you won. If you don't get what you wanted, you lost. And maybe somebody else won. Maybe nobody wins in that scene, but in these kinds of scenes back and forth, you have moments where Benedict is winning, and you have moments where Beatrice is winning, and that kind of like constant shift between those two characters is just and that state of kind of who is dominant and who is in control and in charge in those moments is a lot of just fun to watch, and that's what makes this kind of a compelling story, is seeing you might immediately root for somebody, and then, you know, even when they're losing, you're either rooting for them to win, or you're still appreciating, you know, the other person who is winning in that moment. It's a lot of fun to experience. So there, yeah, go ahead.
No, I mean, like, a final point, but that's also kind of a segue too, is just like the wordplay in Much Ado About Nothing is so good too. Like the way, like, it's just so like that whole sense of, because like this play is just so many verbal sparring matches, and I think it's just like honestly like incredible, like watching it be performed, whether it's by Tennant and Tate or whether it's by Kenneth Branagh and Emma Thompson. Like, it's just, or the Joss Whedon version, I'm sure, but like just the rapid nature pace for, like, it is such like, it is like, it's honestly like a 30s screwball comedy. Like, it is such a like, well, like probably where they got it from. It is like such a like rapid fire pace. Like, you can see the look on their face. And like, no, and like to your point, like knowing they're kind of getting the upper hand in this kind of verbal sparring match. And like one of my favorite scenes too in the Branagh version, going back into like that screwball comedy vibe, is like the scenes where Beatrice and Benedict are like basically like eavesdropping essentially, as like they're getting told the other one likes him, and like it's absolutely one of my favorite moments in the Branagh version, is they're kind of like running across the garden trying to keep up with everybody as they talk, and like here again the Tate and Tennant one, like obviously I like it less just because the set itself is not a giant sprawling garden to kind of run around in. But it's still done, I think, really smart. There's kind of conversations, there's kind of scenes, and just the level at which this play is a like slapstick comedy at moments is just like will never cease to make me laugh, and never cease to just like make me love this play. Like, it's just such a like how much modern comedies draw from these kind of plays, I think, is routinely one of my favorite things of like watching Shakespeare kind of be performed.
Yeah, that's a great segue into kind of one of the other main things I wanted to talk about, is those kind of eavesdropping scenes, because I remember when I was telling you about this, I was like, one of the visual touchstone I had that I mentioned was like, yeah, there's some great scenes that involve painting. I don't remember what it was that involves painting, but like I remember painting being a factor of like the modern aesthetic. There's something is going on with people painting, and then going back and rewatching it was, you have that Benedict scene first where he already, like, from the off, he's hungover from the party the night before, and that's just a fun like thing to see, and he's in a Superman t-shirt, and that's just like a cool, again, like I can connect to that a little bit more than I can connect to somebody in flowery, you know, Venice or whatever Italy kind of garb of the the 1500s or whenever the Branagh one is set, I can immediately relate to this guy who's hungover with the Superman shirt, doesn't like this kid like talking and yelling at him, and then all of his buddies come in and start like talking about him, and he's running around while painting is going on, and like the way they play into that with the slapstick comedy and with like the paint pans flying around and making a whole big racket, and then him very visibly for the audience like slipping his hand in paint, and just the way that like that paint gets all over him over the course of the rest of the scene, to the point that obviously like he goes off that scene, and while like Catherine Tate has her scene, he's clearly backstage taking a shower to get like all of this paint, and like the wardrobe people, they probably have like 5 different versions of that outfit, so they can just kind of like have backups and stuff for when the paint doesn't come out of that Superman shirt or whatever, and just the way that they take a scene like that I could have seen probably 50 different versions of that scene, and none of them are going to think to make this a screwball slapstick comedy about a guy who's got hand in paint and now is rubbing it all over his face in shock for the things that he's doing, or having to, like, he starts being very mindful and trying to not get the paint on anything because he knows it's on his hand, but then he's so caught up in like this thing that all of his friends are saying that he just like completely loses the thread on that, and it just ends up everywhere as he's trying to get away from them, and they're absolutely in on it and recognize that he's stuck his hand in paint and is getting it all over himself, so they're playing it up and trying to just see how much more they can get out of him in that. Like that scene is just like I not having the like having watched the Branagh one as many times as you have, like I don't remember how this is played out in that version, how you're describing it, of kind of there's this big long garden or something that he's kind of following. Like this is the visual version of it that like sticks in my head and resonates. Even the Whedon one, I don't remember how they really approach this scene in that version of it. So like this being such a visually like and part of it is because I know exactly what's going on in that scene. I don't need to focus on the words of that scene, so I can just enjoy the humor of it. And same with kind of the Catherine Tate scene that kind of follows. Like that scene can all be boiled down to Benedict's friends know that Benedict is eavesdropping, so they're playing up the idea that Beatrice loves him for his benefit to try and like matchmake them. Like that's all you need to know about that scene. You don't need to know all the ins and outs of what they're saying and how they're like what the stories they're telling to him are. So like you get that from before any of this paint can stuff happens. Like you get even going into this scene, you get that they basically set up the plan for you. They say we're gonna I'm gonna make it my mission to get these two together, and I'm gonna do it by saying that Beatrice loves Benedict, and you guys are going to get Beatrice by saying that Benedict loves her, and that's going to do it because these two are so proud and so vain that that's all they need to like make this match happen. You get all that before anything happens in this scene, so you can just kind of enjoy this scene for all of the absurdity and comedy that's happening. And David Tennant is like a master physical comedian in that scene. And one of the other things that I'll just touch on briefly is, having watched Doctor Who, and like my primary relationship with him at this point had been Doctor Who, the entirety that like he is speaking in his natural Scottish accent, which I now know much more comfortably from DuckTales on Disney Plus, because he's Uncle Scrooge in the new animated DuckTales TV show. Like it's fun just that he's getting to just be himself. Like he's not having to put on airs and put on another character on top of this. He's just getting to embody Benedict and not have to like throw it through another lens. So that also helps in just kind of like he can let everything else go and just go balls to the wall with the physical comedy of this. So yeah, those are kind of my thoughts on this scene in particular. I don't know if you have anything to add on that.
My big thing to add is just the fact that like this is why I like having these conversations with you, like in particular when you talked about like the backstage of like having to take a shower immediately and like 5 sets of wardrobe. Like it's
I mean, yeah, like the next time he comes on stage, you can clearly see that his hair is like done, it's slicked back. He's clearly washed it, and he is fresh out of the shower.
I think I just enjoy talking theatrical things with somebody who like has a almost 2 decades, right? Like kind of knowledge of like theater and like doing theater, and just like the things that you even like think about that I would like have never even kind of really thought of considered. But yeah, like also like the scene is great. Like it is like it is one of the best scenes in the play. It doesn't matter what version it is. In the kind of Kenneth Branagh one, it's like him basically falling into like a water fountain in the giant garden as he kind of tries to like keep up with everything. And then the kind of the mess that ensues with that. But like this is again such a like pure comedy version of this, and it remains absolutely like one of the high points of the play. I mean, I would argue. Like a thing I'm curious about to kind of transition to another thing that you had kind of briefly mentioned is like, what do you think of Dogberry in this play?
Yeah, so Dogberry, you and I talked about this a little bit before we started recording. It's I'm trying to think, like, because this was done in 2011, and I'm trying to think of like when that ties into like kind of the more xenophobic approach that we've started to see, because the Dogberry in here and the neighborhood watch kind of like idea that they're doing very much feels like kind of like border patrol vigilante, like crossing anti-border patrol people that are taking it upon themselves to do it. Not anybody in an official capacity, just these are people that want to do it. And the fact that he's in kind of like military camo garb, I think fuels that mentality for me. But for me, and it might be one of those that like the Michael Keaton version of Dogberry is just such an iconic, and Dogberry being such a like, Benedict and Beatrice are absolutely like the stars of the show in this one, but Dogberry is one of those like actor's dream roles because he just gets to be goofy and outlandish and stuff. And I have a few friends of mine that either have played Dogberry and have been perfect for the role, or I know would be perfect in the role if they were ever given the opportunity. And so again, like Michael Keaton and the whole "I am an ass, let it be known, let it be writ, I am an ass," and all that, like the way that he delivers it, fresh off of Batman, basically, and he's still like he's very much almost embodying that kind of side of the character a little bit. Like he's so iconic in that this guy is just inherently a little bit more forgettable as a result. And I don't think he has as much fun with it as he could have. I think he almost plays it like it almost feels to me as if the director knew that Tennant and Tate were the stars of the show, so that's where so much of the time and effort got put. And there are other moments that almost feel like they just didn't get as much attention. And the Dogberry scenes in this feel a bit like that. They feel like they could have found a little bit more and mined a little bit more. But the like biggest extent of like extra characterization I feel like we get is actually from like Dogberry's like one of his right-hand man that like talks a little bit of Spanish and kind of like has a little bit of fun with that. Like no hablo español or something like that. Like the little bit that they have with that feels almost the thing that sticks out to me more than anything else. Cause he isn't I guess almost like proud enough that he has been identified and deemed as an ass by the ostensibly the villain of this, one of the villains of the show, in a way that Michael Keaton is, and that good Dogberries are. So yeah, that's kind of like it's the one of the few weaker elements. It's fine, it's not bad, it just doesn't stand out as much as I think it could, and I don't think they have as much fun with it as I think they could, or that I've seen in other shows. Like even the the 8th grade version, the version I saw in 8th grade, I remember laughing uproariously at that. I don't remember anything that they did in particular, but I remember like that being a very funny sequence of that version I saw 20 years ago in middle school or something like that. More than like this guy. Like this guy showed up and I was like, oh yeah, I kind of remember this. Again, having seen this one 5 or 6 years ago now, maybe, or something like that, for the first time, and then he just doesn't, like, especially as an actor that would love a role like that. I don't think I'm right for it, and I don't think I have necessarily even the comedy chops to pull off what I would really want to see in that. But like I can think of 5 friends in my local community that I think would have really chomped into that more than the guys do in this version. So that's a little bit of a letdown. But it's also such a minor subplot compared to all the fun Tennant and Tate stuff that it doesn't bother me. It doesn't take me out of it. It's just like I can think of like one friend in particular I've done a number of shows with would be a perfect Dogberry if he hasn't already played it, and just like I can visualize him being much more having fun with it in the Michael Keaton vein than this guy did.
It's interesting for me because the Michael Keaton version of Dogberry is like, I kind of come in from the other end where it's like that's the only version of Dogberry I've ever really enjoyed. Like I haven't really ever loved another version of Dogberry. Like to me, like I almost view it in the sense of like Henry IV, like Falstaff. Like I have not found a version of that character that I really love. And like at least with Much Ado, like I have Michael Keaton version where like I love that version, but like it is to me one of those kind of comedic characters that I feel like is hard to nail. And so like in this one, to your point, like I don't think it is nailed. Like, and it's even weirder because we've spent 40 minutes talking about how like this is such a much more kind of comedic and kind of goofy and sillier version of the play than the Branagh and Emma Thompson one. And then this is like the exception, like the most comedic character, the one who it's like you almost like it. It's not that he's playing it straight, but like he's playing it straighter than like I would expect Dogberry to be played.
Yeah, I mean at the crux, like as for a comparison, in the Joss Whedon version, it's Nathan Fillion who like so Dogberry is at his core, he is a buffoon. He has absolutely no right to be put in any kind of charge as like a constable or anything like that. He is one of the dumbest characters in Shakespeare's canon kind of thing. And he purely lucks into having like everything fall into his lap that like puts him in the place where he gets the guy, and the guy, upon hearing that Hero has died, because they've kind of faked the Hero's death, but that's not like common knowledge. The bad guy feels remorse more than anything Dogberry is doing to confess his sins, and Dogberry is just kind of the guy who lucked into everything. So like at the core, you have to be just a very buffoonish character who isn't aware that he's a buffoon. You
gotta be like Homer Simpson. Like you have to be
exactly who lucks into it and doesn't like, he doesn't even realize necessarily that when he's being called an ass, it's an insult. It might even be like I am. You're right. I am so great that I am clearly, no other word could describe me than an ass. The guy in this like almost plays it a little too, like as you're saying, kind of straight-laced, or a little too, and my part of it is maybe the neighborhood watch as a militant kind of thing component. Part of it's also like he's set up in a weird way where he's got kind of his little flip chart thing of the rules and guidelines that he's trying to walk people through, and he like flips to a sheet that's like a giant naked lady that he immediately covers, and that that moment, I would say, is even like too much self-awareness for what what Dogberry should be. Like the fact that he like sees that as a problem and catches it and tries to correct it is not what I think of as Dogberry. I think like he would have seen that and just kind of like, if I had been given that moment as Dogberry, I would have just looked at that and stared at that for like a good 5 or 10 seconds, like ogling that picture before like thinking to move on to like, or like I would have made it so somebody else has to prompt the action to continue. Yeah. But like this guy who's clearly like drawn this thing just becomes so enamored with a naked lady drawing or whatever that like that would do a better job of setting up what an idiot this character should be than a very self-aware moment of like, oh no, I shouldn't be showing this to everybody. It's there for a gag, but it's a gag that kind of sacrifices the character a little bit, I think.
Yes.
So yeah, like the Dogberry in this, I think just fails as a result of that. And again, not fails, but
No, yeah.
could have been so much stronger.
Yes.
If he was a little more oblivious than this one, I think comes across.
It ties into something that you touched on that like is really like I guess Dogberry is maybe my biggest critique of this play, but it's really something larger in the sense of like you had said at the beginning, where it's the fact that this play is so heavy on David Tennant and Catherine Tate that the rest of the cast does just kind of feel like they are good. They are like nobody else feels like they really kind of shine even remotely as brightly, and like part of that is the fact that like obviously in the Kenneth Branagh, Emma Thompson cast, they just have a loaded cast. But also I think it is that thing of like when it was being kind of put together, they focused so much more on Tate and Tennant's scenes and less on everybody else's scenes. And so it just kind of feels like, cool, this is a nice interstitial before we get back to Catherine Tate or David Tennant on stage again kind of thing.
Yeah.
And like...
I mean, from a rehearsal standpoint, I can, if you look at, let's say, like a standard show that I've worked on is a 5-week rehearsal run, basically going into something like this. Mm-hmm. Like, the amount of precision and physical comedy and just technical prowess that have to go into kind of the eavesdropping scenes, both the paint one that you have with Tennant and then the kind of like Catherine Tate flying around on a paint hook harness kind of thing. Like, those alone would probably have to take a week of rehearsal time each. Mm-hmm. And so like right there, that's 2 scenes out of your show that is taking up probably 2/5 or a third of your rehearsal time for the entire course. And big, Royal Shakespeare Company shows or whichever, big Shakespeare or big house in London did this, I'm sure had more time and had, more resources to put into it. But it's still, the principle is still going to be the same, that like those are the showcase scenes of this, that they're going to be the ones that get the most attention. And so anything else is going to get, demonstrably less focus as a result. You're not going to spend you're not going to spend as much time on that Dogberry scene as you spent on the paint scene, because there's just not as much action going on in it. So it is very much, you're going to be left to your own devices as an actor to kind of come up with motivation. And then the director might give you some additional blocking notes or might try and like help steer you in a direction with the character. But it's just not going to have nearly as much time.
And it's important to say too, like I think the cast is good. Like I do not think the cast is bad at all. And like I think I could pretty easily make the argument that like Hero is better in this version than she is in the Kenneth Branagh version. She seems like an actual person to some degree, but
yeah, I think even she has more fun with it than I can remember Hero having. Every other version I've seen, I feel like Hero is like a delicate flower.
Yes.
And we never see her not be a delicate flower. Whereas in this one, she is having fun going back and forth with Catherine Tate, and she's having fun like playing with Catherine Tate's emotions and Beatrice's emotions in those scenes. Like she's having fun with it in a way that I've not seen Hero have fun with it in other versions. Same with Claudia.
Part of that
like
too
so
is...
much those characters are so often just milquetoast. They're the love interest. We're not going to pay attention to them because Beatrice and Benedict are the focus. Whereas I think in here they get a little bit more of the comedic rub that we've kind of touched on here. And
I think part of it too is it helps that this is not this performer's first ever role, whereas Kate Beckinsale is like thrown in her first movie to this. And like this performer is obviously older than Kate Beckinsale would have had to been like 16, 17 probably when she first did Much Ado About Nothing. But like that is, I will say, a bright spot for this kind of cast outside of Tennant and Tate is whoever they have playing Hero. I think she actually does kind of shine as Hero. But like that, and like that is kind of my biggest critique is just like the cast as a whole isn't excellent, but even that is still like such a minor one. Like this is a play that I think in the end is such a fun interpretation of Much Ado About Nothing. It's such a kind of goofy, silly, kind of comedic, slapsticky version that like if the worst you can say is that like the cast kind of outside its main leads are good, that's how you know I think that it kind of nails what it's trying to do.
Yeah. One of the other elements of this that stands out for me or stood out for me certainly as I was rewatching it was how they use music and even dance throughout. And I'm curious kind of what your take on that was and what your thought was, because like they bring in a lot of music that again has kind of that 80s rock feel and vibe to it, but it's basically like sonnets, or it's very, even that is like flowery Shakespeare language, but it's done through the lens of 80s rock, that it took me a little while to realize that they weren't singing like an 80s song that I just didn't remember, and it is like hey nani nani or something like that they're kind of using. And I'm curious how what you thought of their kind of incorporation of music throughout this version was.
I think it's smart, right? Like, I think it goes back to me to the idea that this is a modernized version of the play, right? Like I think if they had set this in 1980s England and then kept that the same as it is in like the original version, that would have been when it's like, that is really weird. Like, it makes sense that they would make it into a more kind of modernized musical style, right? Because like, again, if they're like breaking out into like how they sing and how they kind of dance, like at the kind of big dance scene in the Kenneth Branagh version, I'd have been like, well, this seems bizarre. Like, I haven't not seen the Joss Whedon one. Like, I kind of hope that they do some sort of cool like 50s-esque like music scene as well. Like, again, like kind of take it to like the era that it's in to kind of put you in that time and place a bit more, right? Like, one of my favorite things about this play is how much it does make you feel like, wow, this is in its kind of time and place. And I think for me, the music works in that, right? Like, it doesn't suddenly be like, cool, I'm in 1980s, I'm in 1980s, I'm in 1980s. Oh, now we're singing a 1500 song. Like, it like very much keeps, I think, level with where it's trying to take you.
Yeah, and I guess having not watched or not having had a close relationship with any of the other versions, I don't even remember really music being an incorporated factor in the other versions. Like, I would look at the masquerade scene as kind of like, there's some music playing in the background, but it doesn't have lyrics or anything that are tying into it. It certainly doesn't have like the whole cast turn into like a quick musical number to help set the scene of the dance, and then they go off and do the dance. I would expect a version of that being, music plays to transition you into the scene, but then once everybody's in the scene, either the music fades down really quiet and you're not even hearing any lyrics or maybe even music, and it is just kind of like, we're going to go back to focusing on the dialogue. So and then I think like because you have a guy who's kind of playing guitar here and there throughout this version of it, that I don't know how. I can't recall how much music is incorporated into other versions of the show, but it's less. Like I would look at a show like this, and that's probably like one of the, if there are songs in there, and there aren't often in Shakespeare, like those would be some of the first things I would cut, because I wouldn't necessarily know how to, pull it into whatever modern lens I'm looking at doing, or if it's not like I was in a production of Julius Caesar that was set in the Civil War, and so like I don't know how.
I love that idea.
Oh, it was like, in theory it would be great, except when you have Mark Antony cast as an African American, and there's no mention made of like that, or the underpinnings of slavery in there, and it was like the whole thing. There was originally a director who was pitching it as the Civil War setting and time place, because your Caesar was basically supposed to be a Lincoln-esque analog kind of character, but the original director dropped out, and so a new guy got brought in like a week before rehearsals or something, and then tried to pass off the concept as his own, but clearly, and like, because I brought up in rehearsals, I was like, so our Mark Antony is this great African-American performer, that says something when the world around him is set with like us in Union soldiers and Confederate soldier outfits. So what do you and he basically in press, and then even when with us, he was like, yeah, we're not focusing on that. I'm like, you can't not focus on that. That is a very visual component of this casting choice, and so it was very frustrating and did not do anything to add to the show, in my opinion. But that also, there was a whole bunch of other frustrations with that. But so my broader point there is like, Shakespeare gets reinterpreted into every possible setting, every possible scenario, and if you are going to bring music along, absolutely, you kind of need to make sure that the music matches the setting that you're doing. And as somebody who's like, music has never really been like a primary focus of me, I would either need to bring in somebody, as a collaborator to really do something with that, or basically just say, hey, we're going to pick whatever generic, song that fits the setting. Or we might even find, like, if I were to set something in the 90s, I might even find like 90s alt rock music that, fits the idea of, this, or, Sixpence None the Richer or something might be playing, and you have, Kiss Me or something in the background that kind of introduces that scene, but then it fades out, and it's really just kind of a, like, you notice the song, it helps you set the time, but it's not, factoring in, it's not adding to the language of the play so much as it's just kind of establishing the setting or establishing the mood. So the fact that they in this were using, I meant to look it up, I don't know if it's because it struck me as like, oh, this feels like they're using sonnets. It feels like they're taking Shakespearean sonnets and putting them to music and putting them in the show. I don't know if that's what they did. I know I've seen other productions that have done that have basically taken some of his more famous sonnets, and they put them to music as kind of like undercurrent for a song or for a scene or something like that. But yeah, that was one of the things, that the fact that they were just doing that and bring in the whole cast and have people dancing around and doing stuff like that jumped out at me as like, oh, that's an interesting use of music to help further tell this story.
I mean, again, when Tennant first kind of came flying onto the scene in the golf cart, he's got like a boombox with him, kind of thing. Like he's got music playing in that very instant.
Yeah, and he plays on his little handheld keyboard later that the kid has to turn on for him because he can't figure it out or whatever, or I guess turn off. Yeah, so it was another interesting element of this show that jumped out at me as something that I didn't remember from other versions of Much Ado. Yeah, anything else? Any other elements that you want to like highlight or touch on? Really?
I'm just going to give you my whole kind of in review of this play, and that is like, I think for me, the David Tennant and Catherine Tate version is like kind of why I love Shakespeare, and like, granted, maybe I'm a mark for Shakespeare, but like, it's everything it's cool about it, right? Like, it's doing it, like, it's like the different interpretations of it. It's like doing cool different things. It's like having fun with it. Like, I think people, like we kind of talked about earlier in the podcast, like, people get, I think, spooked when Shakespeare is brought up because they imagine like 10th grade English class, and it's like, that's not what it is. Like, it can be something that is so much fun, and like, this play to me is like, it's goofy and it's silly and it's fun, and like, even when Shakespeare isn't done like amazingly, like, just like, I love seeing different interpretations of it, right? I love Baz Luhrmann's Romeo and Juliet version too.
Yeah, I think one of the issues with Shakespeare, and this is something that I talk about with a ton of friends in college when I was studying theater, is that Shakespeare, because we all study it in school and stuff, a lot more people think they can do Shakespeare than actually can. And so most people are probably exposed to bad Shakespeare.
Yes.
They're exposed to bad community theater productions of Shakespeare. And versions like this are not that. Versions like this are, mining every word for humor or something like that. And I remember we talked with friends in college. We would talk about the idea of like, what would it look like? What would art look like if we put a moratorium on and no theaters could do Shakespeare for a generation? And then what would it look like when it came back? Because at this point it is like, people will take any Shakespeare play and they'll put it in any setting and just try and like figure out it. Like, it's almost the the manatee gag of South Park, where it's like you have a bunch of balls that just say, okay, this is the play that you're going to do. This is who you're going to what kind of like gender bent casting or what type of like casting niche you're going to put on it, and then here's the setting you're going to put it in, and let's make that a play. And very often that doesn't work. So you have like in my idea of Julius Caesar, like, it could have been something cool. We did not explore the cool thing it could have been in that production that I was in. And so it was disappointing as a result. And And so there's so much bad Shakespeare out there that people are potentially more often exposed to, or you have versions of Shakespeare that are being condensed down into a 30-minute subplot of a a romantic comedy, that don't have the gravitas and the weight of the full version of that play. It is like, hey, let's do Much Ado, but let's do it in a 30-minute episode of TV. And because that trope of the couples eavesdropping, I'm sure you could find any number of episodes of television that have done that approach. And some of them are going to do it really well based on the show, but others are going to do it terribly. Like I can envision a million bad Disney animated or Disney like live action Disney Channel shows or Nickelodeon shows that would do these kinds of things because they're easy plots for writers of those kinds of shows, and a lot of them are going to be new writers in the industry or something. There are plots that those writers can rely on and basically say, oh, I can take this framework of this great show from Shakespeare and I can apply it to my characters that I have, and let's just cut it down to its basic elements, and you lose a lot of that when you try and do something like that. So I think there's so we talked about the idea of like, you can't do any Shakespeare for a generation. What would it look like when like Shakespeare came back into the artistic media? And so, because in some cases you'd have people that like landed on an idea and wanted to do that idea for 20 or 30 years and now can finally do it again. And the people who had the bad ideas would just let those bad ideas pass, and they wouldn't try and bring them back. So yeah, that's kind of like some Shakespeare theory that we had in my college days.
I'd also say, so yeah, I love that, and yeah, I sign off on that. And like, I would also say, I think that's why I love Kenneth Branagh so much, is that like, he's so clearly someone who, I feel like since he was like a 5-year-old kid and probably first went to the theater and saw Shakespeare like be performed, like fell in love with it and was like, I want to do things with this, right? Like he just has such great versions of Shakespeare and does cool things with them, right? Like whether it's his version of Henry V, obviously was like Oscar nominated, and like Much Ado About Nothing, his version is, I would argue, is like the definitive version. Like his version of Hamlet is like the most critically acclaimed adaptation of any Shakespeare play on film. Like he just, I think, is someone who exudes this passion, this love, and this joy, and like it is not bad community theater Shakespeare, right? And like I think those are the ones that stand out so much, that can kind of leave an effect, right? Like I would love to do a follow-up series on this, on like Michael Fassbender's Macbeth, because I just find it interesting, because it straddles such an interesting line for me in terms of like Shakespeare, in terms of like what we're talking about here. But even like Kevin Kline in A Midsummer Night's Dream, like that's one where it is like, it's super weird and goofy and silly, but like it works. And like I think it's because like they so clearly care and like are into what they're doing. And I think that's kind of my point, and I think the point you're making too, where it's that thing of like, I think bad community theater is a thing of like people thinking they can do it, but they don't necessarily like they don't really necessarily care, like they're not necessarily putting like as much passion into it. And it's like when you see Shakespeare done well, when you see it performed really well, and like you get a great cast and you get a great like kind of direction of it, whether it's on stage or whether it's on screen, like it just is something special. Like it immediately becomes clear why we're still performing this play 400 years later. Like it is just like, it's lit, and like it's really cool, and like it is funny, and it's sad, and it's everything. And yeah, that's what I would say. And I think this version of Much Ado About Nothing is one that's just like, this play is fun, it's still great, and Tennant and Tate give such great performances in it, and they give such kind of, I think, electric kind of, like you said, like BFF chemistry and sparks. And yeah, like that's what you want when you go see Shakespeare be done.
Yeah, it's a good time. It's a fun time at the theater. It's a fun couple hours, and it's like, as I was watching it, I'm going through all those like slapstick comedy scenes, and I'm starting to think in my head, I'm like, wait, I know where the show goes from here. I know we still have the whole subplot of hero being besmirched and then faking her death and all that to go from here. And once you get into that, and like that's largely the second act, that's where it does like take a turn away from the comedy.
Yes,
it's still,
very much so.
It's still there, but the stakes are also like through the roof, because this woman's kind of chastity has been called into question and everything, and so like a lot of the mirth is lost at that point, and I don't think the play ever kind of like recovers from that. But that's where like Dogberry in a good production of it helps like bring the jovial nature back for that chunk of the second act, but this version again was a little lacking on that front. So it very much was like there was a moment there almost near the end of the first act where I'm like, oh, this is gonna like all of this funness is gonna fade away, and I know that like I don't remember how the show copes with that, because it is like if you just watch the first act of this play, it'd be a fun merry time, and you'd have like a great time. Everybody's gonna go off and get married, and then the second act comes back and it's like, oh, yep, nope, this is that Don Juan guy that's kind of just been looking there like a sleazy kind of douchey character, or is Don John? Yeah, Don John. He's just kind of like, and even he. Like he's another actor in this that like is doing a great job as kind of like the weaselly villain, so much so that like he's even kind of got like a nasal nature to his performance and voice, that like he reminds me of the Duke in Moulin Rouge, just in his like intonation and performance. I put a parallel to those two characters in my mind, and again, like so much of it just comes from how nasally he's speaking, and he's kind of talking like this, and he feels like he's a slimy guy, and it's like, oh yeah, all that stuff that guy's been doing and kind of setting into motion is going to come into play in the second act, and everybody's going to be really sad for an hour or so. Before it ends in a happily ever after kind of fashion. But like, yeah, the fact that like the show ends with everybody still in like mourning attire because they thought Hero was dead it's just a weird way to end a comedy. That like still is jarring and jumps out at me all these years later. But it's still like there's the beginning and the like the highs of the comedy in this absolutely stand out among some of the best out there. And yeah, it's like shows like this are fascinating because there are so many good versions of this, and I'm like in my head as you're kind of talking about the other Kenneth Branagh versions, I'm thinking one of the things I mentioned this last week, we talked about Tron Legacy, and one of the actors in Tron Legacy this is on that D Plus show. One of the actors in Tron Legacy had been in Titus, which is Julie Taymor's interpretation of Titus Andronicus, which is it is a very visually stunning kind of production. And Julie Taymor, for those that don't know, is most famous for The Lion King on Broadway, probably, as well as the very ill-fated Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark attempt on Broadway that failed. But she kind of also and she also did Across the Universe is hers. The Beatles film is another Julie Taymor thing. So she has very strong visual interpretation of a lot of these things, and Titus in particular has, I want to say, Anthony Hopkins, I believe, plays Titus Andronicus in that version of the film, and he's stunning. So that's another great kind of like modern film adaptation. You mentioned Baz Luhrmann's R&J is another one that's great out there. Richard III with Ian McKellen is a phenomenal. Like that is, he is one of the Richard III is one of those, like, he's a super fascinating character for me, so much so that in college I read an actor, I believe his name was Anthony Sher, who was a like Royal Shakespearean company actor for many, many years, and he basically wrote a novel about his time portraying Richard III and kind of the whole creative process that went into him getting to do the performance of it. And he really latched onto, there's a line that describes Richard as a bottled spider. And so for his interpretation of the famous Richard Humpback, he was basically on crutches. And so he walks throughout the entire thing on crutches, and kind of talks about kind of how that physicality really started to mess with his spine, doing that because he prepared for that role for like a year or something, to really get like a physical nature of it. But it was like one of the most lauded versions of Richard III that had ever come out at that time. I want to say he did this like in the 80s or something like that. And so like Richard is one of those fascinating characters that like any actor, would love to play, and that Ian McKellen is kind of the most prominent version of it in film. Is it's Ian McKellen, so he's fucking great, of course.
Yeah, phenomenal.
So that's another great version out there. I remember I took a class in college that was basically like it was basically Shakespeare in film and TV, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And we would I want to say over the course of the year we read 6 shows, and like with each show we basically watched versions of those shows in film. And for Othello. The film O.
I was gonna say
that's like Mekhi Phifer and like Martin
Josh
Sheen's
Hartnett,
as the Duke. Josh Hartnett's in there. That's like a really interesting modern day approach. 10 Things I Hate About You is another like great interpretation of The Taming of the Shrew. And so there's like this like we're talking about this and we kind of joked about it being like a backdoor pilot, but I'm kind of like very interested and eager.
That was that was my pitch
in like talking about. Like, let's go find these other versions of these films, or find other versions of the plays out there online right now, and kind of see how what works, what doesn't work, and because there are as again like just like there are very bad community theater productions, there are also very bad film adaptations of a lot of these. But yeah, it's some fun stuff to do, and even. Like some of the ones I would be very interested in finding. Like I don't remember because I remember one of the plays we read was Cymbeline, which is a very like it is almost it's like a poor man's Othello basically. There's a lot of the same kind of jealousy and like mischievous notes that are in Othello, but Othello gets so much more praise and attention. And so I'm curious. I don't remember what we watched for Cymbeline in terms of that class, but like finding an adaptation of something like that would be interesting, or even just some of the like the lesser known Shakespeare things would be fun to do in some kind of like video series or recurring series of you and I just kind of hopping on and talking about these kinds of things.
I mean, I'm excited because I'll finally get to see Hamlet. So
yeah,
which is like arguably the Shakespeare play, and it's one of the ones I've never seen performed in any way. Never read Hamlet. I've never done anything for Hamlet.
At some point in my college career, I was dead set on I was going to read every book in Shakespeare's library. I have not done that, and did not do that. But at the same time, I was like I picked up a lot of different versions of Shakespeare. So I have like a box set of like Laurence Olivier Shakespeare productions,
classic,
because he famously like played Othello in blackface. But even on the Othello front, I don't. I know it was a play version of the show. I don't know if it's one that would be readily available anywhere, but one of the most fascinating versions of Othello that I remember reading about in college is an Othello where Patrick Stewart played Othello.
That's what I was going to talk about. Damn it.
Yeah, everybody else in the cast is African American, so it was still taking that like idea of an outsider, but you've got Patrick Stewart in that iconic Othello role. I don't remember who plays Iago in that, but yeah, that's another one that would be a very fascinating kind of thing to go back and look at. So
Othello in general, just because it's just it plays a bummer. That's all I'll say.
It is. I mean, like. Many of his are they have a whole sect of tragedies that are just. But
like Othello in particular is just like holy shit, like
yeah,
it's a dark one.
Yeah, because like even Iago doesn't really like he doesn't get away with it, but he like doesn't really get punished in the way that he should for the amount of like death that he causes in that story, which is always like that's the real tragedy of so many of those shows is like that like there isn't. Obviously there isn't a happy ending, so it is that the idea of like, well, crap, how could this have turned out differently and better for some of these characters so that at least like somebody gets a happy ending, and just a lot of times you don't. So yeah, there's I think we've got maybe another potential potential show we can sit down and kind of try and tackle here, Logan. I can have some fun with. Because like the Hamlet, I remember watching Hamlet I want to say in high school, but like I don't know if I watched the whole thing or if I like we only watched snippets of it or something. Because like I remember Hamlet specifically we read in like my senior English class, and then I remember at least seeing scenes of Hamlet. But yeah, I don't remember like the full, because like you have like Robin Williams in there famously and stuff like that, and just being like, yeah, that's it's got to be a good version of that show.
Yeah.
I just need to actually sit down and watch it. So yeah, good fun chats here.
Yes, 100% agree.
And I look forward to potentially diving down the rabbit hole of more either theatrical or like Shakespeare specific or just broader theatrical performances. Like some of the things we talked about, like, hey, you can go watch Newsies on Disney Plus, and we can just talk about that as like, hey, here's a film version of the Broadway show Newsies.
Young Christian Bale, if I'm correct.
So Christian Bale is in the film version of Newsies. I'm talking specifically about the stage version of Newsies
that Christian
they
Bale
did. No, Jeremy Jordan is plays the Christian Bale role in that. But yeah, there's a ton of like Shrek was one I would go and watch every now and then on Netflix. I don't know if it's still out there, but Shrek the musical with Brian Darcy James is great, and Shannon Foster, I think. And the guy who plays Donkey in that is friggin' phenomenal. So yeah, there's a ton of like fun theater out there that is available in some form or another, and more of it and more these days. The Frankenstein that I alluded to at the top was very notorious in that it's basically Frankenstein and his monster, and Benedict Cumberbatch and Johnny Lee Miller, who are weirdly both connected because they play Sherlock Holmes, with Benedict Cumberbatch playing it in Sherlock and Johnny Lee Miller playing the Holmes character in Elementary here on stateside TV. But both of them played and did productions of that show where they took turns every night playing. One of them played the monster, one of them played the doctor, and the version I saw, because I saw it basically back to back again at the art museum that day, and they did like a behind the scenes snippet that I imagine would be readily available as the rest of these versions are now. But the fascinating thing was like Benedict Cumberbatch's approach to playing the monster was he did a ton of research with like stroke victims and survivors of like traumatic injury, whereas Johnny Lee Miller's interpretation is very heavily influenced by like watching his child, his newborn baby, basically, and so he plays the monster as like a newborn, and like seeing that, and like that was kind of like the introduction before we saw the version, and you watch the movie and you absolutely see them bringing those elements into that character when he's brought to life and that kind of stuff. So very fascinating kind of like dual actors on how they're interpreting that particular character in literature and theatrical theatrical tradition. So that's another fun potential option that's out there for us to engage in. I like the fact that I was seeing like the Nerdist write up like, hey, you can watch this because it's also directed by Danny Boyle and stuff. Seeing Nerdist basically like tout that as like, hey, here's something to watch in quarantine. I was like, oh, I saw that like 7 years ago at the art museum here in town as a double feature. So cool to see those kinds of pieces of art being reintroduced to a wider audience in a way. Like at this point, I'm like surprised Disney hasn't taken Hamilton, that they've like announced that it's going to be a theatrical release in like November or something of next year, like sometime late next year. And I'm surprised they haven't, just because it's pretty much already done. Like the thing's been filmed and edited. It's just a matter of it being distributed at this point. I'm amazed they haven't put Hamilton out there for everybody to enjoy while everybody's in quarantine. But whatever, Disney doing weird things. So
I would stay tuned for more theater happenings.
We'll have some fun as I don't know if there'll be episodes of That Nerdy Site show or if we'll spin them off into their own kind of like irregularly scheduled thing. But
either way, it'll be happening again. I love this conversation. So
some fun stuff to do out there, and if you have any suggestions of things Logan and I should check out,
definitely.
Let us know. Or if anybody wants to come on and talk about any of these kinds of things with us, absolutely, we'd love to collaborate and have some people on. So hit us up at That Nerdy Site on Twitter. yeah, I think that'll do it for this episode. Thank you, Logan, for joining me to discuss this. This
Always
is
a pleasure. Yeah, this
a
is
fun little thing. It's fun. Because I haven't. So I very much traded in kind of like my life in theater for a life in like talking about video games and the more pop culture stuff. The last show I ever did was in 2014. I was in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
Ooh.
And basically like I did that show, and then like 2 months later I went to like the very first PSX, and then like a month after that Kind of Funny broke off and started doing their own thing, and that led me down kind of this, and I just never really went back to theater. But I still like I very much still attend theater, and I very much still have a passion and a love for it. I just don't have the desire or even the time necessarily to want to put, weeks into rehearsing a show and learning lines and performing a show, and then just kind of like it's done and it's gone. But I will absolutely still, sit down, watch these things and talk about them, all the live long day. So it's fun kind of like getting to revisit this, what was, as you kind of said, I started doing theater in high school, and then I spent at least 10 years doing it kind of like through college, and then just in my kind of like the community here in Phoenix. So it was a significant chunk of my life that doesn't just suddenly go away overnight. So it's fun getting to kind of examine these things and talk about them with other people. So thank you, Logan, for joining me to talk about this.
Absolutely, yeah.
You can follow Logan at Lefty Logie. Anything you want to shout out there, Logan?
It's like 2 weeks old at this point, but you can go check out my piece on Assassin's Creed Odyssey. I feel like maybe it's just like my timeline, but I feel like a lot of people are talking about Assassin's Creed, both pre-Valhalla release and like since then. Like I know DualShockers.
Yeah, they just did kind of a ranking piece of it. And,
disclaimer, I'm literally friends with everybody who read that list, but like I don't agree with it, so it's fine. But yeah, you can go check out that piece on the site. And then this is going live tomorrow, right?
Yes.
So the day this goes live, me and Trevor will be recording the first episode of something. What is it? Something? I don't know. I guess it's a surprise. Be excited. You know what I mean? Stay tuned to your feeds.
Which reminds me, I need to go like start getting another podcast feed set up.
Oh yeah, we have to do that still.
Gotta still do all the admin components of that other show. So yeah, yay fun. But yeah, stay tuned for that this week. Mm-hmm. Speaking of Assassin's Creed real quick, what are your thoughts on Valhalla?
Oh, I'm stoked. I mean, like I'm very much all over everything you're saying. Like I love the idea of like building up your own community. I love the idea of like the story nature of it. Love it being set in kind of this like early Middle Ages England. I'm all about it. I will just devour that game. It looks like what I want Assassin's Creed to be. I know there's like some like tension of like whether or not Assassin's Creed needs to be more like OG or not OG Assassin's Creed. It's easy with you. Me and you are very much in the camp of like OG.
Don't go back to old.
OG says like it's the thing. OG. Like I want to go play the old games, but I know that I won't like them because I've tried them before, and it's like they just don't play well. Like I would love them to like do remaster those games with like the modern controls, and then like maybe but also here's the plot twist: the Animus stuff has always sucked. Desmond always sucked. Don't let Cam Hawkins lie to you. He's wrong. All right.
That's one of those places where you and I do differ in that I enjoyed the modern storytelling component of it. I enjoyed it as more than just the framework of like here's a reason that we can go back and experience history or whatever. I enjoyed the intrigue of Templars and stuff in the modern day. Admittedly, I never got through. I feel like one of the because I feel like the modern Animus stuff kind of comes to a head in Assassin's Creed 3. It seems.
Yes. Yeah.
With kind of that being the culmination of Desmond's story, and so it's weird that like because my introduction was. Like, I had played the first Assassin's Creed, and I was like, oh, that's cool, whatever that is. But then I gave up on that game pretty quickly. And so I didn't come back to Assassin's Creed until Black Flag, which at that point, they'd pretty much all but abandoned that. And you're, like, just some kind of random IT person or, like, game tester in, like, effectively working for the in-game, Abstergo, Ubisoft kind of thing. And so there's, like, almost no, like, tie into that. And then they've kind of continued to change it since then. But going back to those earlier games, like I enjoyed how, it is this like whatever is going on in the past with the first people or first man or whatever that era of people is. The fact that they're speaking directly to Desmond through the characters that you're playing, through Ezio or whoever you're playing as in some of those earlier games, is a fascinating like storytelling and narrative choice for me. So like I always enjoyed it. It's and I never felt that it intruded too terribly into the rest of the game that people enjoy. It was just kind of like a nice, like, here's a breather to, you know, explain why the stakes are high in the modern age, and the idea that, you know, there is still a Assassins versus Templars feud going on, you know, beneath the surface, in modern day. It was a fun narrative choice for me. So I'm very much in the minority that I enjoyed the Animus stuff. Not more than and not
Sure,
as much as the rest of the game, but I don't hate it. I don't actively hate the Animus stuff, I guess, is what I'm saying. But yeah,
the Animus is dumb
and cool. And the Valhalla stuff is very. Valhalla is going to be an interesting one for me because, like, I picked up Origins on our friend Yusuf's, you know, praise and love of it, and I played through almost all of Origins to the point that, like, I remember thinking, like, oh, it'll be really cool if they do this in a sequel of Origins, and then, like, reading how the game ends and figuring out, oh, that's what they did. Okay, I guess they're not going to make a sequel to Origins, or the sequel that I thought they would have made in Origins. But so I didn't actually experience the end of Origins myself. And then I think you and I talked. I played like 80 hours of Assassin's Creed Odyssey. I got the platinum in that one, and I enjoyed that mostly because I enjoy the setting of like ancient Greece.
it's beautiful.
As you very much kind of touch on in your wonderful little write up on kind of the fall or the autumn of Greece there. And so Valhalla is going to be an interesting one because, like, Norse mythology is certainly another one of those, like, it's an area that I don't know Norse mythology nearly as well as I know Greek mythology.
100%
but
same.
I know it significantly more because of God of War, or because of, like, you know, the
Thor Ragnarok,
all of the,
even.
here's what Thor Ragnarok means or something. Yeah, all of those, like, pieces that I've read about just the character of Thor. So I like, and I imagine enough of Assassin's Creed will be surface level, that kind of stuff, that'll be like, here's the things that everybody knows, and then there will be, you know, if you want to dig deeper, hey, here's some more characters. You might see them if you go and watch the TV series Vikings, which I watched like a season or two of, and then just kind of forgot about. But yeah, so it like, I'll play it and I'll pick it up, and it'll be fun to, you know, discuss with you, because I imagine we'll both be playing that kind of around the same time.
Yeah.
But it's one of those, I'm like, I'm not it's not in my most anticipated games of the year ranking still. I'm still, you know, I'm infinitely more excited for Last of Us 2, for Cyberpunk. Sure.
Cyberpunk's a weird one.
For, I mean, like, even Ghost of Tsushima, which I'm
Yes.
like, I don't have much interest for Ghost of Tsushima because it's my fear is that it's going to be like a too much like a Dark Souls like for me, but that might just be because, like, Neo has scared the shit out of me.
Yeah, sure.
For anything kind of set in like feudal Japan. But like, even my like very tempered and limited interest in Ghost of Tsushima is more interest than I am in Valhalla, because Assassin's Creed, it's mostly like, I know mostly what I'm going to get out of Assassin's Creed. So I don't have to be excited for it. It'll, like, I know that'll be, for me, a 7 or an 8 out of 10 kind of game. That I will have frustrations with how the character moves and how some of the combat handles, but it'll be fine, and I'll go through and I'll check all the boxes and I'll do that kind of stuff. So, like, as a result, that game just doesn't, like, climb up the ranks in my, like, most anticipated stuff, but it'll be fine. I'll play it. I'm sure I'll have a good time with it. So yeah, it'll be fun. Yeah. Okay. Cool. So yeah, go check. That was a detour in the outro here. Go check out Logan's piece on Assassin's Creed, and let us know, because one of the ideas we've toyed around with is like an Assassin's Creed in review type thing, where we do go back and explore some of those Assassin's Creeds, because I think I have all of them except Rogue and Syndicate. So I certainly could if I wanted to, but part of the problem is I just don't want to go back and play a lot of those old ones.
Yeah, that's the thing.
But let us know if that's something you'd want us to check out. You can follow me over at Trevor J. Starkey on Twitter. Don't have much new to plug myself. Just check out, as kind of Logan teased, we should have a new show coming out this week, so keep an eye out for that. And otherwise, just keep an eye out for all of our regular shows. We have this show, we have that D Plus show, we have that Anime Pod, that Wannabe Film Class, and at some point we'll be bringing back that Ultimate Video Game List show, Season 3, but if you haven't checked out that Ultimate Video Game List show, you can check out Season 1 or Season 2 right now in their entirety. And thank you to our friend over at DualShockers, Cam, that you already mentioned, who has been he's been going back through Season 2, I think, and catching up on that show, and he's been really enjoying it. So thanks to him for tweeting out about it. You can follow all of us over at That Nerdy Site. Check out thatnerdysite.com for all of the latest content. If you liked what you heard, please rate, review, like, subscribe, and maybe consider us supporting us on Patreon at patreon.com/thatnerdysite. And let us know in particular if this was an interesting type of show for you, and if you'd like to hear us do more of this kind of like deep dive into theater talk. If you're a big old theater nerd like us, let us know, and let us know some shows that we should check out, especially while we're still all in quarantine and trying to, make do in the world as it is. If you do support us on Patreon, every patron gets early access to a monthly bonus episode of this very show. The episode that's out there live now is me and Frank talking about kind of how Frank has been holding up in quarantine, as well as Frank has kind of become one of our, de facto video editors for That Nerdy Site, and kind of how he's started getting into video editing and what kind of inspired him to really start heading down that path. So check out that conversation. It's good. But if you can't throw any bucks our way, that'll be available here at the end of May for everybody. And we'll have a new early access episode out there for our patrons. So yeah, check out all that stuff. As always, thank you for listening. Thank you again, Logan, for joining me for this. Stay nerdy and be good to each other.